Hey everyone, today is an exciting day because I'm going to interview what feels like 1,000 people. Louis is here, and I'm going to tell you why. Louis has over his career, I think it's over 25 years in the automotive logistics supply chain. He has talked to thousands of executives and leader, and he's still doing that to this very day, every single day. And I'm very excited to have you here, Louis. We're switching roles today. You interviewed me a couple weeks ago. I thought it would be nice to interview the interviewer today. So welcome and thank you for being here.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much. And thank you for the interview we did together. It was very well received and people were very interested in what you said. And I hope that I can try and pay back a little bit of that.
Yeah, for sure. We will post a link to that very interview also at the bottom of this video. This will be uploaded here to YouTube. And yeah, let's start the conversation. I think, and you have asked this on stage, I have seen you many times ask this very question. So I'm going to ask you the same thing. Why automotive supply chain? Why logistics? How could this happen?
Yeah. Well, it was never a plan, really. At the beginning, when some friends of mine had a magazine called Automotive Sourcing, which was about procurement, and they wanted to look at other areas that we could look at for their magazine to expand it a bit. And luckily they and we had some very good
Mhm.
contacts we were able to talk to. One of them was Alex Trotman, who was then the CEO of Ford globally, and he said, what does he know? What he said that electronics would be huge for the automotive industry. Who would have thought
Who
that?
would have thought? That's, yeah.
And so I looked at it, and I was very lucky. I looked in those days, bearing in mind it was 25 years ago, which car maker had a lot of electronics in their cars. So I went to BMW. I met a great guy. Professor Peter Thoma was his name. He was the head of electrical and electronics at BMW. I went and met him in Munich, and he gave me a very interesting presentation about what they were doing at BMW and electrics and electrical in their cars. Uh, it's BMW, so they were very technical, and the subject itself is very technical. So at the end of the presentation, and after a great meeting with a great guy, didn't understand a word of it. It was far too technical for me.
But you didn't. Okay.
Yeah. And then the second recommendation we had was from a notorious automotive purchasing leader, Dr. Lopez, who was at that time, he'd left General Motors and he was at Volkswagen. And he said logistics would be an interesting area. And his take was, he was Spanish, although he was working for Volkswagen. He said, why can't we ship, cars to Spain and oranges back or something like that? Why isn't that possible? As simple as that. So I thought I'd look into logistics, and I was very lucky. I spoke to a couple of people. One of them was very negative and said there's nothing happening in logistics. But one of them was a guy called Steve Harley, who was then head of logistics for Ford in the UK at the time. Then became head of European logistics for Ford and then became global head of logistics for Ford. But at the time, he was in the UK, but he was so enthusiastic, cared so much about
Hmm.
logistics that he inspired me and thought, let me have a look at logistics and see if it's an interesting area. Unfortunately, he also gave me some leads, who else I could talk to and things like that, even companies and so on. So he was a great guy and really inspired me that logistics was something to look at, and then spoke to a few more people and really realized. And even then, I don't think I really realized how important logistics was, but I understood it. But I understood it in its most basic way. Okay,
Yeah.
it's moving cars from one place to another, and it's moving parts from one place to another. So the basic thing was that was advice we got, and because I'm not that bright, I understood. I thought I understood logistics more than I understood electrical and electronics. So that was 25 plus years ago. We started with Automotive Logistics magazine. I was very, lucky to get the interviews for that magazine. Were the heads of global logistics at General Motors, who I think was Nick Madich at the time, the head of global logistics or MP&L, material planning and logistics for Ford, who was Ray Pittman, the head of Volkswagen Transport, who was Johannes Fritzen at the time. Chrysler, I think it was just Chrysler at the time, was Dave Hodgson in the States. And we had a Toyota, Glenn Umminger, would it have been, who was head of logistics at Toyota North America at the time. So I was very lucky to get those interviews. And one of the things that came up in the conversation was General Motors. Nick Madich said to me, "It would have been great if you'd got us all together in one room and did one interview instead of having us separately." I said, "Look, it was hard. It was tough enough getting you in, over a period of time to get you individually, never mind in one room." And then from then it became, well, if we could have got us together, and that's where the conferences came from. A great way of getting people together without coming into any kind of regulation trouble of getting them all together in one room as such.
Yeah.
So the conferences came from that, and people were saying to me, it's all well and good reading about them in the magazine, but we want to start meeting them. And that's where the conferences came from there.
Well, so I think my immediate question would be, how on earth did you make this possible? I mean, you were just starting out in logistics. How did you get meetings with all of these executives? This might be very, very interesting also for our audience. Actually, somebody who's starting out right now and hears this is like, how is Louis getting a meeting with the executive vice president of logistics at a car company that quickly? Can you maybe guide us through that? Was it easier
It was
25 years ago?
probably easier in those days. I remember, at Ford, for example, when I spoke to their PR people, I said to him, I want to interview your head of global logistics. Their first reply was, why? In the sense, not why do you want to interview, but why do you want to interview the logistics guy? Why aren't you interviewing someone else?
Like
Why
nobody
the
cares,
logistics
or
guy? Yeah. That's not an important topic.
okay.
So it was really just a question of asking. I think they were unused to being asked. So I think that helped me. They were probably grateful to have the opportunity or that someone was interested in what they were doing, as opposed to, everyone else was talking to, maybe the procurement people were big shots in those days, but in this instance, the logistics guys were just, happy to be interviewed. And as many instances as, for people in any industry, it's just asking the question is often the hard bit. So yeah, no, they were happy to be interviewed, and they were then happy for the conferences as well. When we said let's now organise conferences, they seemed to be happy to have the opportunity to meet each other as well.
Wow. Okay. So that, I think, if we can extract any advice from that, 25 years ago, okay, it was a little bit easier. But also, let's be honest, I think supply chain and logistics, it's my perspective, is still a little bit underrated, right? In the end,
Absolutely.
okay, let's move stuff from A to B because it works here outside with Amazon every single day. Why can't you do that with cars? Why
Yeah,
can't you do that with
yeah,
parts, right? Your
yeah.
people are sitting in the boardroom trying to explain. But I think that CEOs in general grasp. We have seen more CEOs that actually come from a supply chain background, and then we have seen more understanding from CEOs also. But maybe going back from to that advice, if somebody is maybe a supplier or somebody is maybe a young professional who wants to get some advice, get into the conversation, learn about the trajectory of what somebody has done over 25 years in supply chain, what advice would you give them? What are some good strategies to get conversation with leaders who have maybe climbed up a little bit the ladder and that can tell you something about your future trajectory?
That's a very good question because I do think it's harder now. I think because of the importance of supply chain and logistics, the fact that it's now at CEO level, that people are asking those questions. So I don't know. One of the things is wait for 25 years, and the people you speak to as managers will now become,
Yeah.
the senior VPs and things like that. Like I said, Steve Harley at the time was the head of logistics for the UK,
Mm-hmm.
and became the head of global logistics for Ford. So it isn't easy. I just think logistics has become far more important, too important, and I think it helped that I didn't know too much. So by asking people to help them, can you advise me? Can you help me? I'm young, or I'm not so young, and I wasn't that young then. I mean, 25 years ago, I was still 30 plus.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I can't even work out what I was, but I wasn't young. Um, but uh, the advice to get them is definitely to try, definitely try. Because the good thing about logistics, and even at this time, is they're normal people. I got the reputation for knowing everyone in the industry, And then when we started doing the conferences and people were meeting each other, and my bosses said to me, I now know why you know the logistics people, because they're nice guys. They're down to earth guys. Logistics, that it's, although as difficult as it isn't brain surgery. I'm not even sure how many people really got into logistics at that stage because they wanted to be in logistics. They're normal people who you can speak to. The only challenge now is they're really, really busy. So busy, it's ridiculous. They were busy then, but now it's unbelievable. Quite often when I want to speak to important leaders at logistics, the conversations will be at weekends, late
Yeah.
Saturday night, Sunday night when it's late, or even during the day, 7 o'clock in the morning, 10, 11 o'clock at night. That's the best time I can speak to some of the leaders in logistics. So is there advice for that? Not really. And I certainly don't know the answer, to speaking to people. But if you can, then, keep it simple. Don't pretend to know anything. Be honest and tell them. But I think perhaps young people and students have a better opportunity because people want to help them and want to help the next generation.
Yeah, I have a general perception with that as well. And specifically in logistics, I think it's persistence, right? Maybe with a lot of things in life, maybe all of them, but persistence, getting the things done, having not so nice conversations. I always tell suppliers that I work with, hey, tell us the bad news, right? That that and then let's figure it out. That's what makes a good supplier, because things will go wrong all the time. But you just went, I think this week, you went to transport logistics in Munich. So I'm asking myself, because I missed it, what are executives and leaders in the logistics supply chain industry talking about right now? What keeps them up at night? Where does it really hurt?
That's a very good question. Fortunately, it's the same things
Yeah,
that you said. But why don't people or people buy book? You buy a small book on Amazon. You track it. When it's coming and it's delivered. You're buying a car for 50, $100,000 or euros, and you don't know when it's going to be delivered and so on. So there's still the basic issues. Visibility is still an important issue, perhaps even worse because it's so global now.
mm-hmm.
Visibility is tougher. Every IT company, every logistics company offers you visibility, or they tell me they can offer visibility. And yet, when I speak to the car makers, very often visibility, tracking and tracing is still an issue.
Mm-hmm.
The complexity of the global automotive industry. It's still such a complex industry. So many parts coming from so many regions to be delivered just in time onto the line. Um, and then from the cars outward, the specialist equipment. You have to use a Roro ship in general. You have to
Yeah.
use the car carriers. That specialist equipment that has to be used. And I suppose the other issue they're having now um, is the people who can do it. In the sense, one of the biggest issues for trucking companies is drivers. It's as simple as that. So and both for the finished vehicle deliveries and even for the trucking companies who truck the parts, because the last mile is still trucking and so on. Other issues is technology, the upgrading of technology, the AI coming in, so that it's kind of talking about AI, but I see some things that when I'm looking at AI, I use it in the most simplest way, Chat GPT. And one
Yeah.
of the things that I read a lot is it's not, Chat GPT can do a lot, but you've got to know what prompts to ask. And I think we're still at that stage. Logistics leaders aren't tech experts. They're good, and so on, but they can't know everything all the time. So, and they're so busy, they can't, drill down on some of the stuff. So they need to, with AI, need to know what inform. The good thing about AI is people at this stage, anyway, are really important. You've got to get the right information in, and then you've got to know what to do with the information when it comes out.
Yeah.
So I think it's just complexity, what do you call it, the geopolitics. They're the things that are concerning them at the moment. Possibly the new competition, the competition coming from China. Just it got moving into the EV world. is already a big issue. The batteries is a big issue, and then the competition from the Chinese. There's so many things. The good thing about logistics, if you're an outsider like I am, or when I was writing the magazines, and then they still do the magazine and they still organize great conferences, it's nothing solved. There's still so many problems. So there's
Yeah,
always going to be room for people like you, hopefully for people like me, and definitely for the magazines and the conferences.
yeah, for sure. Is there I'm always wondering, you're talking to a lot more OEMs that I'm talking to. Is there maybe an OEM that has surprised you with their approach on how solving one of these issues that you just mentioned? You know, may it be tech, may it be drivers, something, or maybe a tier one where you say, "Oh wow, that's surprising," and then of course, yeah, what's the result?
Yeah. I think it's funny. It's almost two opposite examples. One of them is Tesla, how they've used the IT for everything in Tesla, but
Mm-hmm.
their what do they call it? First principle approach. That almost one of the worst thing you can say at Tesla in those days to Elon Musk is that's how we used to do it. That's how the automotive industry does it. He doesn't want to hear that. He wants to hear something new or what suits them. So
Mm-hmm.
there's that approach. The other thing that I liked with another car maker, and I said, "What do you think you've done well over the last couple of years with all the capacity issues and so on?" One of their answers was, "I didn't panic." Some people bought assets. I'm speaking now to some of the Chinese. They've so many Roro ships coming on board now.
Yeah.
They're now cutting back. They're trying to cut back their orders. They're now trying to work out how to use them because it's all right coming one way. How do you send you're sending back Roro ships empty and things like that. So one of the things was I didn't panic. We tried to solve everything we did, but we didn't panic and do panic uh, find panicked solutions where we rushed into something. We kept our calm. So a couple of years later, when we thought it would always be as mad as it was, a couple of years later, everything's calmed down. So they haven't got them into a situation where they've got too many assets or something like that. So there's two different approaches. One who did it completely different, and the
Mm-hmm.
other one who almost, didn't panic and kept their nerve in the tough times.
So one of them just says, "Hey, what works for us? I don't care how we've done it in the past or how the automotive industry is doing that." And the other one is just the not to panic is, I think it's so difficult, right?
Yeah.
Uh, I don't know, but yeah, how do you put a band-aid on it and then also find a cure at the same time? In the best case, you're doing something proactive, but of course, yeah, that's very interesting.
And it's hard not to panic when one of the things I've said for years was why don't CEOs have more care more about logistics? They don't care about logistics. The old line used to be if your CEO calls you, if you're head of global logistics and your CEO calls you into a meeting, you don't think, oh, that's nice, he's showing interest. You actually think, oh no, what's gone wrong? What factories have we closed
Yeah.
or something like that. Now, definitely during COVID, the capacity crisis, the chip crisis, and so on, CEOs suddenly started taking an interest into logistics, and now I'm beginning to wonder if that's such a good thing because they're getting involved in an area with little knowledge. So they're kind of trying to get involved in stuff into logistics without. And you again, like a CEO, you can't know everything, but you think you can. You often think that's definitely not all CEOs, but you often think you have a solution. But without the deep knowledge of what actually happens on the ground, sometimes that CEO's involvement can actually cause more headaches and cause panic rather than when they keep out of it and let the experts get on with it.
Yeah. Yeah, what I'm also wondering is with the supply chain, if the customer is incentivizing or, maybe the customer is also brainwashed right now, right? Over the last 5 years, we have had supply chain problems and it's always a big issue. So I think maybe subconsciously a customer already thinks, okay, if I receive my car within the next 5 days in Europe or within, let's say, 3 days here in the United States, that they would already be very satisfied when the standard before that was actually, I don't know, maybe 3 and 1 days. I think that that could also be a problem again. Like it could speak against improving this the supply chain, because if the supplier doesn't care, sorry, if the client doesn't care that much, why would we even make such a big effort? I don't know. I think that's maybe a steep thesis, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things for me is that car manufacturers, by their very nature, they're called car manufacturers. They're not called car retailers or anything like that. We call them car manufacturers, and I think that's the way they act.
Yeah,
They're trying to become mobility companies, but at this moment in time, they're still car manufacturers. So everything is based around manufacturing the car and less about, or it seems to me, maybe because I'm more involved on the manufacturing, the logistics, and the supply chain side, that's what I see the most. But they don't focus so much on the end customer. I think one of the,
weird,
again,
right?
yeah,
That's weird.
yeah, I
Sorry
know.
to interrupt. I mean, everything is about sales, right? I've worked in. Sorry to interrupt you, but I've worked in a in an environment where we said, "Hey, the most important thing is to produce cars," and I very much disagree with that. The
Yeah.
most important thing is that somebody buys your cars.
Yes.
I
Yeah,
mean,
absolutely. Yeah. There used to be that saying, I've seen it, in jokes over the last few years, the cars used to be made just in time. Now they're kind of made just in case a customer wants it, as opposed to a real, proper plan.
yeah.
So you're right. Like I said, I think that's why they call them car manufacturers as opposed to, car retailers or whatever it is.
Let's maybe track back. Everything is, of course, I actually can't hear it anymore, but everybody's saying everything is changing all the time. I don't think that will ever change. But here's the question: what do you think has changed most in the last 12 to 18 months?
It's funny because it probably would have been a different answer a year ago or 2 years ago. A fear I have is that we're going back to where we were. I mean, the big change is the change to electric vehicles. That's one of the big changes, and we're kind of handling that in a car maker kind of way, a traditional car maker kind of way. Tesla broke all the rules, and because of that, they became very successful. Everyone else decided to become EV makers or mobility companies, thinking that changing the name to mobility company makes a difference.
Hmm.
It doesn't really. And I think the only reason they're really trying to catch up with Tesla is not because I think it's Tesla's valuation that they want. They don't
Yeah,
care about the cars that they make. They see Tesla that's valued at what I don't even know what it is at this moment in time, and probably after today when he's had an argument with Trump, it's dropped more.
I think it dropped
Uh,
14%
yeah,
yesterday.
exactly. Yeah, but at one stage he was, Tesla was worth more than Toyota and Volkswagen put together, or whatever it was. It was those kind of things, which is or was ridiculous in its own right. And I think that's why the car makers tried to chase that. But a couple of years ago, we had the chip crisis. I had car makers calling me up and saying, "How do we become better customers?
Hmm.
A better supply?" They want to be the customer of choice because they saw then that the chip maker chips didn't care if they supplied Volkswagen or Toyota or Stellantis because they weren't that important. If they didn't have the business from Stellantis, they would go to, Apple or Amazon or whoever it was. So they then said how, and then you had the ocean shipping crisis where again, the ocean shipping lines didn't care. They had,
Right.
everyone wanted it. The prices went up. No one cared about the car makers. And again, they said, how do we become the customer of choice so that people want to supply us? The easy answer was always pay more. Okay, but that obviously isn't the answer that they really wanted, and they were paying more anyway. And it was a real thing that they were presenting to their CEOs and so on. I think now we've gone past that, so we're ready. So only 2 years later, whatever it is, now it's back to the old ways of now we're the customer, we're the king. So now they're almost going back to their rules. So it's not quite as it was before, but it's almost like before, where the car maker, the customer is king, and you have to kind of work our way.
Yeah.
Also, a couple of years ago, or maybe more, I knew a couple of guys. One guy who was very senior at a car maker, and his responsibility was trying to find new solutions for sustainability for a car maker in their supply chain and logistics. Spoke to him maybe about 18 months ago. I said, "How's that going? Is there anything I can do to support you?" And he said, "It's a little bit out the window now. It's all about cost." So, sustainability is still there. It's still in the thing, but,
Yeah.
in reality, with the cost crises they're all having, with the cost of investment into EVs and everything, sustainability is still an important thing, but it's, there is that kind of trying to find the best place of the ideal kind of solution, sustainability, but not at extra cost, or
Mm.
not at any cost. Hopefully, it should be actually a cost reduction in some way. So things have changed the last couple of years almost back to the old ways.
Yeah, I'm wondering, it's so cyclical sometimes. And it's also interesting to me to see how things just get thrown out the window. What Because in the end we can all have good intentions and we want to save the planet, but if people aren't making money in the end, you have to survive the short term to be able to make it to the long term. And it's the same. The problem from my point of view is that maybe 2 3 years ago, when there were the fat years for supply chain companies maybe providing parts or logistics services, there were some, as you said, that didn't care as much. Although, let's say, not chip makers, they don't rely on the automotive industry, but maybe a ro-ro shipper, right? Okay, if you increase your prices 5x, okay, to make a short-term profit, I sometimes don't understand where the long-term vision is there. And that can be so extremely frustrating to me.
Yeah, but it goes both ways. They'll tell
Yeah,
you,
of course.
I should have a long term vision. What about you when you're trying to buy from me? You're saying, right, we want to no long term deals, and so on. So that's always been the frustration of logistics companies, that
Yeah.
they were expected to invest a lot, but they're still on short term deals. So maybe they're getting their revenge. The shipping lines in particular. I read somewhere, and I don't even think it was an automotive company. I think it was another company that said,
Mm-hmm.
the problem at the moment that they're facing is when there's a crisis, people don't say, how can we solve the prices? They just see it as an opportunity to raise their prices. They don't think, oh, how can we fix the capacity crisis? They just say, oh, brilliant, a capacity crisis. We can raise our prices. So it's got to be both ways. But and we're humans. We don't learn. After was it? I don't know which one of the crises. After say 2008, right? I'm not going to use credit cards. I'm not going to take loans, and I'm going to cut back on luxury goods. It's a waste of time. Have I got credit cards now? Yeah, bloody have.
Yeah, sure,
You
sure.
don't
Of
learn, you never
course.
learn. And
Three
maybe the
of them, right?
automotive industry, yeah, maybe the automotive industry is the same. We don't learn.
All with different benefits and travel lounges that you can go into.
Yeah, exactly.
I
Yeah,
know how
yeah,
it goes. I know how it goes. Same here. But yeah, so I think that we need to change. And I think a very successful car maker, maybe let me ask the question first. What would you say specifically in the supply chain separates a successful car maker, or maybe that's the second part of the question, a successful supplier from a not so successful one? Because we will have problems in the supply chain over the next 10 years. There will be a wave that the suppliers can be riding. There will be a wave that the OEMs can be riding. What can you do if you are listening to this and are a supplier or an OEM? What do you think you could do?
I think it's all down again, the good thing is about people, but I think it's all about the mindset. I interviewed the head of global logistics at Adidas recently, and
Mm-hmm.
I said, about moving. He used to be in automotive, so I went from automotive to Adidas, consumer company, and so on. And he said it's all about the mindset. You can change from one to another, but it's all about having the open mind and the mindset to change. And I think that's what's going to be important. You know, the mindset from the top to, further down is that you've got to have that open mind, that willingness to change, the willingness to improve, the willingness to take on board new ideas. I think that's what's going to make the difference, because there's going to be so much change. You've got to have an open mind. You can't think the old way. You know, the car makers at the moment are suffering because they keep thinking the old way. The Chinese are coming in and ripping up all the rule books.
Yeah.
They're lucky because they haven't got an old way to kind of stick to. They haven't got, as much legacy as, that makes it so hard for the car maker to change. But we've got to, have a different mindset. We're still a little bit thinking of the Chinese as Chinese, it's all because of the government. It's all because they're cheap. It isn't that. They've become much smarter. They're faster. They're agile. They're flexible. They're willing to do things. I've read a Steve Jobs book,
Yeah.
and he was saying that one of the reasons he makes the iPhones in China was not because they were cheap. That's an advantage, but they were willing to do things that they weren't able to do. He wanted special types of glass, and he went to the biggest glass makers in the US and elsewhere, and they just said, we're the biggest and we can't do it. Went to China, and they found a way. They wanted to find a way to do it, and they found a way to do it. We've got to have that mindset, be open and not think we know everything, because we certainly don't. That's going to change. Tesla are in danger of falling into that thing that they've now almost become. They're
Okay.
not
Yeah. Yeah.
changing enough. The new cars, right? They made mistakes, that the Cybertruck and stuff. Okay, but at least they were trying something.
Mhm.
Was they've almost become stuck in their ways now.
That's
So yeah,
that's a tweetable statement almost.
yeah,
I was going to ask you about
yeah,
that. There's a nice quote. Good times create bad times, and bad times create good times.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Sometimes I'm just thinking that we have to suffer a little bit to be really innovative. I think the Second World War in the United States was a terrible period, right? Because it was right before the Great Depression, but it was also, there were a lot of inventions that brought the country forward. So now that we seem to be, or maybe OEMs, legacy OEMs, have to be in in a very good standing over the last 30, 40 years. It's just so difficult to stretch yourself.
Yeah.
Is that the reason?
It is a little bit. I mean, there used to be the thing well, wasn't in America necessarily, but I remember General Motors at that time and Toyota were kind of swapping places. Who's the biggest in the world? And that's Volkswagen and Toyota or whoever. But the thing used to be, I don't want to be number one, because then everyone targets you. You get all the bad press and everything. I'd rather
Yeah,
be number two. And there was that. I think it was an advert for the car hire companies. I think Hertz were the biggest, and who was number two? They said we're number two, so we try harder. Avis, that's it. We're number two, so we try harder. That was their advertisement, and I think we we kind of got used to being the biggest, kind of got used to being the best, and we weren't necessarily trying harder or not trying harder in the right way. And again, the end result, the customer,
yeah,
that still isn't top of the mind. For enough of the car makers, it's kind of in their minds at the end when they say, "Why aren't we selling the cars?" But it's not in their minds early enough
yeah.
to make sure that they sell the cars.
So in essence, we need to be hungry again.
Yeah, we need to be hungry again, and that's what I mean about that kind of the attitude. It's when you talk about what does a logistics company or what does a car maker need to be, in the future. It's about flexibility, agility, openness to new technology, openness to new ideas. So it's all kind of it's all a mental, kind of thing. It's something that we can do with our brains. All right, using technology and everything, but as opposed to just trying, we're not. Uh, it's not. It's about thinking differently, and that's what I think that we need to do in logistics, perhaps especially. There's too many things. How many times I speak to different suppliers, and
Hmm.
you hear it. They're saving pennies and wasting pounds. Well, I can't understand if they moved in this direction, they'd save a lot. But instead, we're fighting over pennies. That's what a lot of providers and suppliers tell me that. So we've got to have that open mind to be willing to try things. And it's tough. We've all done it. I've seen it over the years with some, I remember one car maker said to me, at the magazine, hold the front page. I've got a brilliant thing coming that's going to be change logistics at our car maker. And this was maybe 15, 20 years ago. We're going to save $100 million from this. And then after a few months, I rang him up, said, "Hey, how's it all going?" He said, "Oh, it's out the window. They wouldn't let me do it." Why not? I said, "Because I needed to invest $1 million to get it, but they wouldn't give me the $1 million, even though I showed them how they would save $100 million." And maybe we're still restricted a little bit like that, but we've got to have these open minds all the way.
Yeah, that sounds a little bit like a main complaint that a lot of suppliers have with procurement. I think because procurement there is, or finance and procurement together say no to a lot of stuff.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
um, maybe it makes sense to have an invention budget every year. I don't know, or an innovation budget
yeah,
where people can draw from that is somehow limited so that things can try it out. But I think business cases are just so important, right? You almost have to a little bit predict the future and say, hey, here, customer, this is what you're going to save. Yes, you're going to invest 1 million, but you're going to make 10 within 6 to 9 months or years or whatever it is. Very, very, very interesting.
yeah.
Maybe
Six to
that's
nine
one
months, six
complaint.
to 9 months, you'd get away with it.
Yeah,
But it's when it's more than a year, then it starts becoming a problem. And as soon as there's another kind of crisis or whatever it is, what's going to get cut? Innovation budget.
of course, of course. Yeah, yeah. No, that's one major complaint I've also heard, but I think my audience really wants to hear this because you're also talking to a lot of suppliers. What is the main complaint? One thing that OEMs could do better? Maybe even a low-hanging fruit, doesn't have to be. I don't want to put you on the spot, but anything that you can think of?
Well, I mean, the obvious thing is a real partnership. That's the complaint. I'm not saying that's the answer, but that's the
Yeah,
big complaint now, Tommy, that they want a real partnership. The car makers will tell you, yeah, yeah, yeah. We're going in that direction. We're having a real partnership from now on. But when you say that off the record to a provider, they laugh. Partnership, huh? That's not what they want. That's not where they're moving towards. So that's what they say is the answer, because that's when you can be more honest. The what do you call it? The RFQs, when you're going through a
yeah,
tender, it's kind of limited. So even when you've got ideas, if you've got ideas that you think can save the money, there isn't a place in the tender process to put an innovation in,
yeah,
really. You've got to win the business and then try and convince them that you can do something different. But to win the business, you've almost got to go through the robotic phase where you've got to fill in the forms. You've got to be a box ticker, box checker, before
yeah.
you can really sell the innovation. So that's definitely a complaint from the providers. And there's low hanging fruit in the sense it's getting harder and harder. Packaging is still an area where I think there's a lot of potential savings.
Yeah, we talked about this in the interview that we had a couple of weeks ago, and we will link that here at the bottom as well, where we talk about when to place innovation in an RFQ, or if you ever should do that. So
Yeah,
check that out. Um, it is just interesting because I think, and maybe we can add to that, in logistics is also a legacy service
yes,
compared to maybe AI, tech, and whatever. So there is a lot of reason for people, I'm saying reason, to sometimes say, we have always done it that way. And that's why there is, same with older countries, 60-page scope of work documents, right? Where maybe in IT, sometimes you don't even know what you want. So you ask your suppliers, hey, what you can offer? Here is my problem that I have. Am I actually having that problem? I don't know, but can you help me? Right? So that's a way more agile approach. Maybe we should just throw everything out and see we want and say, what is the one KPI that we want to measure? we want to have our cars or our parts at this specific dock location by Tuesday. I don't know. How can you figure this out, make it operationally and economically work? That could be an idea. But so I think we have touched on a lot, but I wanted to ask you one last thing. Looking into the future, is there one thing that you would bet on that will change within the next 2-3 years? Like if you had to go into your brokerage account right now and invest 70% of your money, let's not exaggerate, let's say 30% of your money,
It's
who
nearly
and
8
what would you
million
put?
euros that I've got in my account there.
I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, funnily enough, the thing, and this is going to probably, and maybe I'm showing my age here a bit more than anything. The thing I wouldn't bet on, strangely enough, is AI.
You would not.
Yeah, I'm still wary of it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So, and when I talk to people who even talk positively about AI, they're kind of talking about things which should be improving from a technology point of view. They're almost saying like it can improve visibility. Well, visibility, there's so many things that can improve visibility as it is. So I'm not yet convinced about AI, but I've said almost from the beginning. You see, when I was trying to log on to this onto this interview, I'm
Yeah.
not a tech expert.
That
I'm
was
not
my fault.
yet.
That was on me.
Yes, but I'm not sure about the benefits of AI. I do think it reminds me of something again right at the beginning. Between 20 and 25 years ago, there was a new head of logistics at a car maker, and I was lucky to speak to him in his first couple of weeks in the job. I said, "You've been brought in as a new head of global logistics. What have you been tasked with?" And he said, "My bosses have said," and I'm probably showing how long ago it was. My bosses have said they bought a new I2 system,
Mm-hmm.
and I have to work out what it does and how to use it to improve our logistics. And it seemed the wrong way round to me. It should have been right. What do you want? What do you need? And how do we fix it? I kind of like the old Toyota one. I don't even know if Toyota is changing now. But what they used to do, they almost used to literally walk through the system, walk through the plant and see what the problems are and then build systems, and even the systems was simple at the beginning, putting boards up and writing stuff and things like that before they then, went in more technical and invested into technology or IT. I think we're kind of saying everyone's saying IT, AI is going to fix everything. Right, let's buy it. Let's spend billions on AI.
Let's do it right now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then work out what it does. And that perhaps is one of the issues with, top down leadership when the CEO gets involved and says, how are we, everyone's going on about AI. How are you using AI?
Problem. Yeah.
Yeah.
When it's a
And then
marketing gig, right?
oh no, I better start using AI because the next conversation we have, he's going to say to me, well, I told you about AI. What are you doing with it? So that's one of the, perhaps controversial. I don't know. Maybe other people agree with me but don't want to say it out loud, or maybe others agree, or maybe I'm just dumb, which wouldn't surprise anybody in the least.
Hey, but you can't provide a solution without defining the problem first, and that sounds like what's happening with AI a
Mm.
lot.
Yeah.
I'm always trying to find a use case. I'm always trying to see if I can give it a chance. Sometimes it works, sometimes it really doesn't, and I'm disappointed with the results still, of course. And it could very well be that we're underestimating it, and I hope we are. It could be a great tool, right? Was the same thing with crypto 3 to 4 years ago, where everybody said this is the perfect thing. We're going to put IDs on the blockchain. We're going to put ETAs, they can never be falsified. We're going to put our transport plan on there. It's going to be amazing. Right? Maybe that's still going to happen. Who knows? But those things really need to mature. And in the end, it's about solving a problem.
Mm.
Doesn't
Yeah.
matter how you get there. So
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
I
And you can tell now. I mean, you've asked me some questions that I don't know the answer to, and yet people don't really realize that I'm not here. This is AI. I'm not really allowed.
Exactly. Yeah, this is
When
all
there's no
pending,
solutions I can think of.
and I don't
Oh.
think they will ever know. So, hey, Louis, I know that you're helping a lot of people in the automotive industry. I know that you're talking to a lot of students, you're talking to a lot of executives. I think you're helping also companies to match with the perfect candidate. I think that is a new program that you have just launched. And I want to know from you how people can contact you, but maybe tell me first, just talked about it, what problem would they have in order for you to solve that problem?
I think, my thing is, as I've always said, I don't know things, I know people.
Okay.
So that's where my strength is. When I do research, I've just done a packaging, automotive packaging survey. I didn't, work out what I needed to know or anything like that. I just asked three questions. What are the three biggest issues that you're having in automotive packaging? And I wrote it, send that email out to the heads of global logistics and supply chain and different car makers, tier ones, and so on, and globally. So the thing about the people is you don't get my opinion. I'm finding out what the actual people who do it. You might say, from the saying, I'm getting it from the horse's mouth.
Yeah.
And again, on the sort of recruitment headhunting side, again, I'm not a headhunter. I can't help you write your CV or anything like that. I just know loads of people. So people who say to me, I'm looking for a job somewhere, or car makers or LSPs and so on are saying to me, we're looking for people in this kind of area. I mean, one thing I will kind of add to that is I do think that speaking to purchasing people, speaking to logistics leaders, and speaking to the LSPs, I think that one of the things that's changed, and I've had the two kind of sides to it. An LSP saying, looking for someone, is saying, we're looking for a sales guy, uh,
Uh-huh.
as is one attitude. But I've also seen that I think speaking to people in supply chain, what they want now from their LSPs is they want people who are well connected on both sides, maybe at both car makers as well. The purchasing and the supply chain organization have to be well connected. They have to work with each other, not to just get the cheapest supplier, because it's got to be something that works with your logistics and supply chain organization. And the same when people are buying from LSPs, they often say the sales guys are offering this one thing, but when you can then go to the operations people, they're saying we can't do that. So
Yeah.
you've got to get the two sides well connected. So I'm seeing people going from car makers to LSPs, and that's an advantage because they know both sides. Um, so that's kind of one side of it. So again, what can I do for people? It's using my connections, or bringing people together in whatever way they want. That's the advantage I bring. And just because I'm old, and the people I knew as assistant managers are now senior VPs or CEOs of companies and things like that.
Yeah,
So the good news is I'm old. The bad news is people say to me, "Who's the head of logistics at so and so?" And I can't remember their names. I do know them. I just can't remember their names. But yeah, that's
but you
just
have an address book, so
yeah,
that's
that's the good thing about iPhones.
yeah, yeah, that's perfect. So if I wanted to reach out to you tomorrow, maybe I need a connection, maybe I want to start a survey and I want to get some market intelligence. How can I do that?
Well, the good thing about being called Louis Yiakoumi is that I'm not John Smith, so you can look at you can find me on LinkedIn is one of the easiest ways. It's probably the easiest way. You'll find all my contact details and so on. So that's probably the easiest thing is just look for Louis Yiakoumi on LinkedIn is probably the easiest way.
Okay.
Yeah, unfortunately, my name's now becoming a bit common because my son Anthony is also in the automotive logistics world. So I used to be Louis, I just say it's Louis in the automotive logistics world. Now I'm just known as Anthony's dad.
Yeah.
Again, another sign of old age.
Well, I mean, that's kind of nice if your son is making that means that your son is making you proud or people admire him. So that's great. So, yeah, so if you need any advice in the automotive industry, I would highly recommend that you reach out to Louis. He has been to me a great resource, and I have learned a lot today. I would also encourage you that if you have any questions regarding the procurement side, maybe you're a supplier or an OEM, go to www.21consulting.xyz. and schedule a free consultation. And Louis, any last words today? I enjoyed it. Thank you for being here. And yeah, maybe let's do this again when we learned a little bit more about procurement, supply chain, logistics, and automotive.
Yeah, we shouldn't leave it too long because probably in the next year or so, all the problems for global supply chain and logistics might have been solved by AI, but I doubt it. But I was going to say as well what you just said yourself. If you want to know anything about logistics, procurement, and procurement, you're a great person to turn to because you can ask questions to get on that you can't ask the person you're trying to sell to. You can find out the truth behind the scenes from people like Gary on. So again, I really recommend that they connect with you.
Thank you. Yeah, good session today. And
Yeah.
thank you so much, Louis.
No, thank you. There's so much that could be covered, but so little time.
For sure.
Yeah.